Breaking the cycle to step forward. Authentic conversations from lived experience and a professional perspective in overcoming abuse with Chris and Beverley Ann.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward podcast with myself, Chris Tuck, and my lovely co-host.
I'm Beverley Ann. Welcome everybody.
And we've got a special guest in the room today with us, Dr Noelle Blackman. Welcome, Noelle.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris and Bev. I'm really pleased to be here.
Fabulous. So we've got a lot of different things to discuss today. You are our very first guest who has worked with special needs and people with disabilities. And we're going to come back to the language or the use of language when we're speaking about this cohort of people in a moment, because we often do get it wrong, and I want to make sure that we all get it right. But we're just going to introduce you first, Noelle, because you've got a glowing bio. I love it. So you are a therapist, coach, consultant and trainer with over 30 years experience, specialising in the field of trauma-informed practice. You are a founding member of the Institute of Psychotherapy and Disability, IPD. So you are the former Chief Executive Officer of Respond, and we're going to ask you a lot more about that later on. And you gained a lot of extensive experience there in developing the practice of psychotherapy with people with intellectual disabilities and in supporting trauma-informed practice and relational approaches in organisations. So that sounds fantastic, but I'm going to ask you, what does it actually mean?
Good, that's lovely.
Okay. You're a regular speaker and contributor to national and international symposia. Again, that word, what does that mean? And conferences. Your PhD focused on the use of psychotherapy in supporting people with intellectual disabilities who have experienced bereavement. And then you've got some publications that we're going to talk about in a little while, including your research papers and all of your work, which just absolutely fascinates me. And I'm looking forward to digging a bit deeper. So you say your priorities are to work with organisations and individuals who wish to be part of the change towards making a more compassionate society. I think we can all get behind that, 100%. A society that sees the person first rather than the problems, one that considers what happened, one that supports their staff and works towards sharing the power and working in partnership with everyone to bring about what is needed for people to live their best lives that are free from permanent fear and trauma.
Absolutely.
That is brilliant. So
no
would you say that again?
No small wish there.
Why aim small?
Exactly. There's a lot to do.
It is. Beverley, can I hand over to you and just ask what you think about all of that?
Well, before we start going through your bio, what's really interesting as well, Noelle, all of it's interesting, but it's like, let's go back to the beginning. What was life like for you growing up, you know, with family, education-wise?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Well, I was wonderfully lucky. My mum and dad married when they were really young, had me when they were really young. They both come from, you know, fairly humble beginnings. My mum's parents were hairdressers. My dad's dad was a milkman, really, a dairy farmer and milkman, not farmer, but he had a herd of cows and a milkman. And they both were children during the war, and they wanted a really good life for me and my brother. My dad worked really hard. He was an apprentice in an advertising agency. He worked his way up to become kind of, you know, quite important and earning good money there. And he was determined to send us to private schools from primary school upwards. And he also, in those days, it was a bit easier to buy a house, I guess. But he did manage to buy, first of all, a tiny little modern semi. And then eventually we moved when I was 5 to this incredible old Victorian house, tumble down. I think it was impossible to heat and impossible to do any work on because I didn't have enough money, but it had a great garden with a garden beyond the garden with fruit trees. I suppose you'd call it an orchard. And we just had such an idyllic childhood there because we were just allowed to run free, really. I loved being out in the garden in nature, looking for newts and tadpoles, climbing trees, making potions. That was my childhood, and I'm so lucky that I had that. And we'd just be let out in the morning, wouldn't come home unless we were hungry, often not till tea time. No one knew where we were really. No one really worried because there was also like a few of us children, and we'd all be together and look out for one another. And sometimes we did come across difficult people, flashes, like you did. But we just dealt with it, and we actually I remember several times telling the police about that and being questioned and leading my younger friends away and things like that. But we were, I was lucky. I had a really good childhood. So that was me up until the age of 16, and my dad had a heart attack when I was 16, and he lost his job, and we were really swiftly taken out of our perfect schools, as my parents thought they were. No, I don't think any school's perfect. I have to say, me at school, I'm an August baby, and I always felt on the back foot at school. I never really understood what was going on, ever. I was always, I was always sort of, I think I was thought of as sweet, but not very clever. And reports would often say, could try harder, we think.
Oh, I remember that on reports.
The red lines on all my work.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of friends. I was very social, and mostly teachers like me. I loved art. I spent a lot of time in the art room, and I loved drama. I spent a lot of time in plays. And I also joined something that was to be a complete lifesaver for me, which was called Greenwich Young People's Theatre. And I spent a lot of time there during my teens. I also spent a lot of time actually at the stables. So I found places when life was harder at home. I found places that were my refuge, and it was like another family, another place to be. So horses eventually gave out to drama, and then my dad lost his job, and we were taken out of school really swiftly. I could tell there was a lot of uncomfortableness in the family about that. I think they couldn't pay the last fees, and we were being dragged into their heads for all of that stuff. And then we went to the local comprehensive, which was a real shock to the system because it was massive. I had friends there. Luckily, I knew I had a really good friend there, but it was so big to find your way around. And I went in at sixth form, and I didn't really understand how the school worked. That's always been something I've struggled with, actually, understanding how things work. Never know. I always think, how does everyone know what to do? I rarely do. It takes me a while. And then my parents split up soon after I started at that school. And so life just sort of disintegrated for me, really, around about that time. And I didn't spend much time learning. I didn't have any space to learn in my head. I spent a lot of time bunking off school, getting up to things I shouldn't really probably have been getting up to. I spent time, I didn't get on with the art teacher at that school, sadly. So that was not the place that could be my refuge. But I did do a lot of theatre at that school. I did a lot of leads and plays. And what I've realised, looking back and thinking about things in preparation for today, is the solace I felt actually in theatre, in being someone else and trying to understand why they were doing what they were doing in their world through their script was a very important thing for me. And I also actually loved books, and I think books served the same sort of purpose. I could really lose myself in somebody else's story and their perspective on the world and their way of understanding the world, and it helped me understand a bit more about the world. I think I'm still a bit like that now. I can just disappear into books.
I love a good book.
I just finished one. I'm bereft, but anyway, yeah.
I know that feeling as well.
So I got no A levels, no surprise there. And by the time I left school, my mum had actually left the family home, and I left the family home at the age of 17. And I lived in a variety of squats and fairly grubby, difficult, not terribly safe places. But you know, it was fine. I didn't think of it as dangerous or unsafe. I think if it was my daughter living like that now, I might feel uncomfortable. But that's what we did. And I did that for quite a few years. And I just worked in cafes. I didn't have any sense of direction, or I didn't really think about the future. It was not relevant. It was just like today. And then about the age of 18, and I don't really know what kind of nudged this, but I took a bit more hold of direction of my life. I think we'd moved into a squat that was a little bit more stable, and there was a bit more stability. It was a bit calmer. It was a bit more like I could make a proper home. And I started to think a little bit more about just a tiny bit about the future. And I hadn't done any acting for a long time then. I hadn't been connected to theatres or anything. And it's the only thing, when I thought about what do I want to do, it's the only thing I could think of. I didn't have a clue how you'd make a living at that. But I just decided to write to any theatres that I knew nearby. I didn't know how you'd find any theatres that weren't ones you just knew. But I wrote to the Tramshed Theatre, which was a little theatre in Woolwich near where I was living. And they were so kind to me. They invited me in and they sat down and listened to me. And they offered me like the lowest of low job, which was an ASM role. That's basically assistant stage manager, or general dog's body, basically. And I got paid a little bit of money, which was amazing. I've never had a salary before. And the group of actors, so that group of actors were in that theatre for, you know, they were resident actors. And they just took me under their wing completely. And they just loved me. They were so kind. And they recognised that what I really wanted to do was be an actor. And they helped me to get an equity card, because every theatre gets one equity card every year. And they made sure I got the equity card. And then they helped me think about drama schools and what kind of drama school I'd like to go to. Then they helped me find audition pieces, and they worked on them with me, and I got into drama school. And that just was like completely changed my life. It was just amazing.
And where was your drama school that you went to?
It was in Stratford. No, it wasn't actually. That's rubbish. It's called East 15 because the theatre that it came out of was East 15 Theatre in Stratford. But it actually was in Debden, which is near Epping in Essex. And I was living in Thamesmead at the time, a really long way away. And my boyfriend at the time and I had got a puppy. God, why? I can't imagine. And I used to have to travel about 2 hours on public transport. I'd have to get the bus into Woolwich, walk under the river, the little walkway under the river.
Yes.
Then get the Docklands Light Railway to Stratford, and then get the Central Line out. It was a bonkers journey. Every day. I was there for 3 years. And where am I going with this? Eventually, I couldn't possibly carry on living there, and it was mad. And the dog really, you know, I couldn't leave him every day. I went through a period of time of taking him with me to college and leaving him in my friend's car when we were in sessions, and then taking him for a walk in between.
Before you carry on, Noelle, can I just make a not a statement, but an observation? So Bev and I both have said in previous podcasts, it just takes that one person or group of people to listen to you, acknowledge you, and give you that leg up, literally. I had that one person who did the same for me at the age of 16, got me into college, got me on a road, a different path. And that set me up for my life, at a career as a management accountant, even though I don't do it anymore. And then, you know, but it just takes that one person. And Beverley shared that, and she's going to share it again in a minute. I've shared it, and now you've just, so we've had a conversation, but we don't know all of this detail that's coming out now, which is great, because that enables us to have these conversations. So what I want to say to people out there listening is that you don't need loads of people around you. You just need one person that's going to hold your hand, support you, and just be there at a pivotal moment in your life to just give you that helping hand. And if we all look outwards to children and young people, maybe we could be the one to be their one person to pay it forward. So I just wanted to just butt in there and give my 2 pence. Beverley, do you want to share?
Yes, because I think one of the things I took from that straight away, I was engrossed listening to you, Noelle, is because the importance of your environment and where you're living, it really has an impact. And the trauma you experienced, sadly, because your father lost his job, the impact that has, regardless of your age, is much bigger than we actually realise at the time. We get on with it, and it's like, oh, well, we did this and we had to do that. And it has a consequence. So when you were talking about, when you were living and, the different places that you moved to, and then you found a space that you actually could see yourself, oh, yes, I'm here. I can make a home. That is a real pivotal, to some people it gets overlooked. It's small, but it has a huge impact, doesn't it?
It really does. Actually, you're making me cry, because actually I had never thought of it like that. Yeah.
Well, and I go back to, being young myself. So I was in a hostel when I left fostering. It broken down. I was in a hostel at 16, and you only had 6 months. Now, whilst you're young, 6 months seems a long time, but as I was coming up to 4 months, it was like, oh, I haven't got much time left here. I need to start thinking about where next. And so I was working, and it was always about earning my wage to have a roof over my head, because I had I couldn't go back. I could only go forward. And I remember finding a place, splitting up with my boyfriend, feeling like everything's falling apart because it's huge at that time. And what it was, in the middle of the night, I felt so lonely. And there was just one person, and I called them. And the next morning I felt really embarrassed. I was 17, not even 18, 17, thought I was really grown up. And the next morning, and I went into work, I was really sheepish. And I said, I'm really sorry I woke you up, because it was way before mobile phones. It was a traditional land phone. So, and they gave me a little signet ring. And they said, just want you to know you're never alone in this world. There's always someone there who is willing to listen to you. Yeah. And that, for me, has always stayed with me.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Just to be listened to, it's so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And especially, children and young people, we say this enough, we don't listen to them enough.
Absolutely.
So, no, sorry, Noelle. So this is what we like.
Oh, I love that. So anyway, forget the dog. That's not the important bit of this story. We'll get back to my story. And I just love. I mean, it was actually really tough. It's a very tough training to be an actor. And the particular drama school I went to kind of did the method acting. So you really had to live it and put your entire self, make yourself very vulnerable, basically. But anyway, for me, I loved it. You also had to continually prove yourself that you're worthy of being there. At the end of every year, there would be half the year asked to leave, and I got asked to leave at the end of the first year. Not for any reason, actually, that I wasn't working hard enough or anything like that. There was a kind of favoriting of the boys, and it was run by women, and the women didn't particularly like popular women, if I'm honest. Anyway, I refused to go, because I was like, oh God, no way am I leaving this now. I found my path. This is what I'm doing. I've even got my union card. I'm going to be able to work at the end of my training, because in those days they were like gold dust. You couldn't work without one. It's not like that now. So I just phoned them up in the holidays, and I said, well, I'm not leaving. I'm paying my fees. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm going to be an actor, so I'm not going. You'll have to actually manhandle me down to the end of the drive. So I went back, and they went, well, okay, you'll have to go back to first year and do it again. I said, fine, okay, I'll do that. So I went into the first year for a term. It lasted a term, and then they put me back in my year, and it was fine, and nothing else was ever said. And so I did the whole 3 years. Like at the end of second year, you'd hold your breath. And I didn't. They did it with me again. And then and then I worked as an actor then for 7 years after I left drama school. Again, not an easy thing to do, but I was with a different boyfriend at that time who was also an actor. He trained at a proper drama school, Central, And he knew what you're supposed to do. They, you know, at their drama school, they'd all seen agents we didn't do any of that at East 15. And he kind of knew what you're supposed to do. You get the stage magazine and you get a thing called Contact, and you just, you know, keep writing to everything you know that's going, and you get work. Anyway, I was lucky. I got quite a lot of work. I worked more than he did, actually, in theatre. And I worked for 7 years. Not solidly. There'd be little gaps, but I was pretty lucky. And then that takes me to the age of around 27. And that's when I had my first baby. So I finished my last show when I was just pregnant with him. And then I really decided I didn't want to go back to acting, because you go away for kind of weeks or sometimes months on end, and you come back and then you and your partner have to kind of like re-find each other and not get fed up with each other because you're, you know, just out of rhythm. And I don't want to do that now we've got babies. I just don't want to do that. So I didn't. I did cleaning jobs, and I took the baby with me in the buggy, and I just sort of rolled my sleeves up and had about 3 different cleaning jobs, and that's what I did. And then 3 years later, the second baby came along. I think in between the 2 babies, I had begun to think, well, I could do some drama workshops. That's one thing I can do still, the only thing I can do. And I was also very involved in the peace movement, actually, in Green Common particularly. And I did quite a lot of training people around non-violent direct action. And I loved doing that training, because I'd often use like drama methods, like, you know, workshop things out. And one of the people in my women's group was a psychiatric nurse. She led a psychiatric day centre, and she said, love it if you came and did some drama with some of our patients in one of the daytime activities. So I thought, oh gosh, that sounds incredibly grown up. I don't know if I can do that, but I'll have a go. I had, I think, been doing some workshops with people with learning disabilities as well. So I think I'd got a bit of a thing going, and I was loving it. And I was finding the power of theatre, how the work that I did, particularly actually with people with learning disabilities, was just transformative. People just, you know, just came into themselves, found confidence, said things that they would never have said. It was amazing. And then I think it was actually the bit of work in the psychiatric day hospital that led me to somebody saying, do you know there's actually a training, which is a drama therapy training? And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I just thought, I know how incredibly powerful theatre is. It's been my salvation, but I can see what it does for other people as well. And I'm slightly scared of it as a facilitator, because I feel like powerful things happen, and I'm not exactly sure sometimes how, or whether maybe I need to know a bit more about how to manage it if it gets too powerful. So I found out about drama therapy training. Now, I'd never gone to university. We'd forgotten this bit. I didn't have A-levels. I didn't go to university. And the drama therapy training was a postgraduate diploma. And I'm like, how the hell am I going to get myself on that? Because my acting course wasn't university. You know, these days it is, but it wasn't. It was just like literally practical, no written work needed. And one other thing that I had started to do, and I can't really remember how I got into this, was I trained to be a reminiscence facilitator with older people in older people settings. So basically, it's a sort of therapeutic thing. I've somehow always done therapeutic things. And you kind of, you train to be able to train the care staff that work in older people settings to use very sort of everyday objects to take people back to times when they were more active in their lives, and then often they'll just kind of, they've got a lot to say because they're much more confident about talking about earlier life. And when I was doing that training, I met the woman who ran the drama therapy training, and I said, I really want to do this training, but I haven't got no A-levels and I didn't go to university. What should I do? And she said, well, keep on doing this stuff. Because this is like clinical experience, because you need clinical experience as well as academic. And she said, and we'll deal with the academic stuff. So I did a lot more of that. And then I went to see her about a year later, and rigorous interview. And they accepted me. And I was like, oh my God, this is my new next flip. And that was amazing. That was like proper education where, you know, you had to analyze papers and have critical reflective discussions and write essays about really quite difficult things, but I did it, and and I qualified, and I loved it, and I met amazing people, and it was like, this is what I was meant to do. It's the therapy stuff. It's the working with, what is it? Making a difference in people's lives, but also bring my interest in how people work to kind of do that. So it brought a lot of things together. And so the end of that training, I didn't go straight into a job as a drama therapist. I think I still felt slightly fraudulent. But I went into an NHS post, which was a training post. And it was an NHS trust that worked with people with learning disabilities. And I devised lots of trainings, ran lots of trainings. And after I was there for about a year, and it was in a long stay hospital where people with learning disabilities still lived. It was before we supposedly closed them all down. That's a whole other story. But anyway, the first tranche, when we were closing them down, the start of care in the community. And so we were closing that hospital down. And the reason that my training department existed there was because we were going out into the community to sort of smaller group homes that were setting up then, and helping them think about empowering people to live good lives, not institutionalized lives. That was the idea. But there was a massive amount of loss as people were moving out of the hospital that people hadn't thought about. You know, some of those people had lived there 20, 30, 40 more years. And also the staff, you know, the staff had actually generationally worked there, and they lived in houses that were just all around the hospital. And so this institution breaking up, as positive as that was in so many ways, was just a huge cloud of grief was just over the hospital. And I decided, I started to run loss and bereavement training, and that was just like, we couldn't run enough of it. People were just so hungry for it. And then I decided to really stick my neck out and go to the leadership team of the trust and say, I think we need to set up a loss and bereavement service here for people with learning disabilities as they're leaving the hospital, or for those who have left. And they again, another pivotal moment, because I couldn't believe they let me have it. They said, you can do this 1 day a week for a year, a pilot, and then write why it's necessary after the end of the pilot. And it's still going pretty well today.
Wow.
So that was amazing. That was 1997 when I set that up. And I was there in the trust for 10 years doing the combination of the therapy work and the training, and eventually the therapy work really became the thing. And I employed 2 other therapists in that service. And then 10 years down the line, there was a sort of parallel service that set up at a similar time called Respond. And I'd had it on my radar. I thought, oh my goodness, there's another psychotherapy service over there doing sort of similar work, but it was around abuse, not around loss. But, I mean, so similar, all the things in it. I mean, lots of abuse came into the loss work. And we had a little bit of, you know, we'd talk a bit, and they used to run lovely education talks in the evening, and I go to those. And my colleague then, who became the colleague who stuck with me in the loss and bereavement service, David O'Driscoll, and I got very interested in Respond. And then a post came up at Respond because the director there was leaving Ireland and take his work to Ireland. They took on another director, but they needed an assistant director. And our trust was becoming a little bit, you know, the reworking of the NHS constantly. We felt our service was under threat. So we decided to go jointly for the post of assistant director. And we got that. And so we held our loss and bereavement service together, did half a day, half the week each there. And then we did the other half the week each at Respond. And then after a while, I can't really remember how long, it could have been as long as a year, David decided he wanted just to really do the loss and bereavement service, and I decided I really just wanted to do Respond. So I became the assistant director, and he went back to that service, and he's still there now. And then eventually the director role became a CEO role as Respond grew bigger, and so I became the assistant CEO. And then, you know, it's an organisation that works with so much trauma that there's often trauma rippling through it that's not understood, and that happens on the board as much as anywhere. In fact, the board's probably the place where it's least understood. And so there are often quite abrupt decisions made, as there are actually within any small charity, because you know, it's a difficult job to be responsible in risky times, and small charities are always facing risky times. But also we did risky work too. Anyway, there was a sort of crisis on the board in when would this be? Can't exactly remember. Yeah, it was around 2011, I think. And there were some changes made, and I stood forward to be temporary CEO. Well, we didn't have a CEO. And the rest is history. I never really kind of like moved out of that role. So it was a kind of very strange place for me to be. I'd never on my horizons thought I really want to be a CEO. It's really not my thing, actually. But I'm passionate about the work Respond does. I felt somebody had to do it who understood the work. And the way that I did it was by calling in people to fill the gaps of the things I couldn't do, because there, you know, lots of things I can't do and still can't do to this day, that I've never felt backward in coming forward and saying, can you help me with this? Because, you know, there's things I do well and there's things I can't do. And so I just ask other people to do that or create a role. That's always the difficult thing when there's not enough money, but that's how I led the organization.
Noelle, before you carry on, can I just ask how your acting really fed into the therapy, just to give everyone who's listening, watching, a clear understanding of the crossover and how you got your service users or your niche cohort of people that you were working with. What were the benefits of your work with them?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Chris. I was thinking about this a little bit. I went out for a walk to try and really think about some of these connections, and it's not 100% clear, because what led me to drama therapy was the power of drama in those creative workshops that I'd run. And then that took me into the training. But the training was something different. The training took us through all sorts of things. One of the things it took us through was develop the emotional development and psychological development, which I found so interesting. You know, never thought about any of that. So that really fascinated me. There were lots of ways of using drama, whether it was to embody and take on a character, or whether it was more about the way children play with little, you know, like small objects to make little world play. So it could vary right the way through to a scripted play that you might write and direct and perhaps perform in, or to an improvisation around a difficult topic, or taking a chair and sitting and talking to the person you're having a struggle with, and then maybe sitting in their chair and having an answer back. So many ways you can use drama. And I used all of those in my training, but I chose very clearly to work with people with learning disabilities, because I think of my own learning disabilities in some ways. Mm-hmm. Don't have a name. I'm not interested in seeking a diagnosis. I don't even know if I need one, but I have always struggled to make sense of things. And I've always written things down carefully. I'm not frightened to ask the silly question. I don't think there's such a thing. I'll read things over and over again and read around it to try and actually make sense of things. And so unconsciously, I think I was very drawn to working with those people who have been pushed outside because they learn differently. And at Respond, that was also autistic people with learning disabilities. And more as time went on, I'd include autistic people who didn't have a learning disability. First of all, it was people with learning disabilities and autism, but it also became autistic people who also have trouble making sense of this neurotypical world. And so that's what interested me. And what's wonderful about being a drama therapist is you don't have to rely on the spoken word. You don't have to rely on two people sitting in a chair kind of having aha moments. It's not like that. You can use all sorts of creative ways to help somebody get in touch with something. I mean, it might be, for example, I work with lots of people who didn't have huge amounts of language, or even if they did have language, it was really hard for them to coherently tell you very much about their life history. So I'd find out as much as I could about people's life history. So I had a sense of where the trauma where the trauma, you know, what the trauma history was. But I can remember one guy, he just had very repetitive stories to tell me, really. But I used to sand tray with him, and also he loved tools. His dad was the hospital handyman, and he was like his dad. He held his dad in such awe, and he always wanted to be fixing and doing things. So we had, you know, lots of tools and lots of things, and we had the sand tray, and so he'd be doing stuff. He might draw the stuff, or he might place stuff in the sand tray. And through all of that, I got such a sense of him. It's really hard to completely explain it, but with the sand tray, we moved at one point much more into it was more like cooking. He started to do stuff that was more like cooking. And then I knew that actually he was bringing his mum into the frame. Now, he missed his mum hugely, and it was so painful to talk about his mum. Mm-hmm. We could gradually start to talk about his mum. And we started to remember that his dad grew veg, and he'd go out and pick the veg for his mum to cook the Sunday lunch. And, you know, things just flowed through us doing stuff together. So it wasn't pure drama. And actually, I'd say I actually call myself a disability therapist now, because I don't think of myself as a pure drama therapist. You know, I have all those resources in my toolbox. But I don't always need to use them, but I can be creative. I can be playful. There's lots of times where I'm working with people who have a learning disability, but some of that learning disability may well be environmental, because they've been so neglected and so abused, and no one's ever given them the opportunity to play. They have no idea how to play. Yeah. And so I'm thinking of one woman I work with where it was so difficult to be with her at the beginning, because she made herself so unpleasant to be with. Nobody ever wanted to be with her. And I had to work on myself so hard in the supervision as well, to find somewhere where I could connect with her. But I kept going, and whatever she did, she couldn't shake me off. And I think that meant such a lot, actually, in the end. And she might do something terrible at her home, and we had a model at Respond, which I was very instrumental in kind of developing, where we had two therapists assigned to each person. One would work with the person, and one would work with the network of support around the person. And so we worked really hard with the network of support around this young woman to not be punitive with her, to recognize why she was doing what she was doing. And they were so receptive to that and so brilliant. And she gradually began to feel the world around her change and be more accepted. However much she pushed, it was actually still being, you know, I mean, the boundaries were held, but there was more warmth and more compassion.
Yeah. And unconditional responses, or unconditional love, you know, it can be very challenging to provide at times, but it makes a huge difference. And it's reversing that negative messaging, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, you're going to leave me anyway, so I'm going to be horrible to you.
Yeah.
Because if I'm nice to you, I'll get close to you, and then you're going to go.
Yes, exactly that. But after a long period of time, so I work at Respond as long-term work, because there was so much, you know, damage to undo, but also because of having a learning disability, things take a bit longer. So I worked with her for quite a few years, but after a while, when we built some trust, I started to be playful. And one of the things that we played, and I've never of a million years have thought this would happen, and it just happened spontaneously, was Pico. She never played any such game, you know, the simplest thing. And she loved it. She loved that I would come back, you know, or that I'd want to find her, or, you know, it was just that simple thing that, you know, if she hid, I would want to know where she was.
Yeah.
And it was lovely. And then actually we also got to, I read her stories, really early stories, because no one had ever read her stories.
Yeah.
And then we started to make up our own stories. And, you know, it was really early stuff that was missing in her life. So, you know, that's kind of where my drama therapy training took me. It's probably not where any of my tutors would have thought. It's not what they teach you in drama therapy training necessarily, but it wouldn't necessarily have come from a, you know, straightforward psychotherapy training either. But all the psychotherapists that respond are either creative trained therapists or more traditionally trained therapists who recognize that actually to work with our client group, we need to be creative and spontaneous and bring that sort of richness of just trying things out and not relying on words.
It's opening up a way of communication for the person that's in front of you the best way that you can, no matter what that is.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And doing that through relationship, you know, so it's the relationship that's so important. As you said, that sort of, you know, I was there, whatever she did, I wasn't going to reject her. And that's, you know, and that's kind of what I brought into my life beyond Respond. I now work with a small local charity, and I feel as though it's interesting. I was reflecting on this as well. So I've kind of worked at national level at Respond in, you know, really sort of being out there and talking about trauma-informed practice as the way forward. And I still do that. And I think we have, you know, there's a lot to do on a national level. But I also think we can make massive impact doing things on a very local level. So I co-set up a small local charity, living quite a deprived part of Hertfordshire. And I'm really keen through the work we're doing there, actually, that we become a trauma-informed community. And I'm looking on the internet, and I'm seeing there's quite a few little pockets of these trauma-informed communities setting up. And we can all learn from one another, because actually, you know, just terrible examples. Like recently we supported somebody who was so isolated and so lonely, living on a big estate with people around him. Nobody knew quite how bad things had got. Pigeons in his house, electric, water cut off, everything cut off. An older man, didn't know how to access his pension, hadn't accessed it for years. You know, just terrible.
Wow.
You know, what do you call it? You know, just stuff all around him. Could hardly move around the place. And you know, a lot of people will judge people for getting into situation. And also there's a lot of alcohol abuse and a lot of drug abuse on the estate as well, and a lot of judgments are made by professionals. And I just think, let's be a bit more compassionate. Let's understand where some of this comes from, and let's look at how we can actually respond in trauma-informed ways, because it will change so much, and also enable our community to be more trauma-informed and compassionate to one another as well. So
absolutely. And Noelle, while we're talking about trauma-informed, because we all have different interpretations of it, what does trauma-informed mean to you, if you were to explain to somebody? Because everybody says, oh, what's trauma-informed, or what can I do that's trauma-informed to change things? Yes,
absolutely. Great question. So I think it's a really important, actually, question to ask, because there's such a lot, you know, at Respond, we've been talking about trauma-informed since Respond existed 30 years, and nobody ever wanted to hear. It's only recently it's become the zeitgeist everyone wants to know about, and people are very quick to have a little tick box to say, yes, we're trauma-informed, and they've ticked all the boxes. And I'm like, do you know, it's really hard to be a trauma-informed organisation, so hard. And even Respond, who've been working at it for all those years, you know, you never get it right. It's something you're constantly working on perfecting. Especially when you're working with trauma, and trauma just ripples around and affects everything, and affects all the dynamics and relationships within an organization. So what is to be trauma informed? It's first and foremost to understand and know what trauma is, to know that it affects people unconsciously. And I think that's the key thing, that, you know, people are not being manipulative because they respond in a certain way. They're being hyper aroused, they're being re-triggered, and something's happened unconsciously. And so they can't consciously not make that thing happen. So that's the first thing, to really understand what trauma is and the unconscious nature of trauma responses. It's also working relationally through your relationship with others, because the kind of trauma we're talking about is interpersonal trauma. Now, I'm not talking about road traffic accident traumas here, I'm talking about interpersonal traumas. And so the only way that you can heal those kind of traumas is by enabling somebody to gain trust again in the relational world. So you as the person are the instrument of change. So you have to be incredibly conscious of yourself, your own trauma and your own triggers, your own how you are as you enter into a period of time with somebody. You're going to be supporting them in some way. recognizing when you're getting hyper aroused, because actually you can also help somebody to come down a little bit and regulate by your own breathing and calmness. So so they're the elements there, really understanding what trauma and the unconscious nature of it, recognizing that you're the instrument of change. It's through relationships with you that you can change. So that's about being a trauma-informed person to a certain extent, recognizing the work that goes into enabling you to work in that way. So you have to really look after yourself, not let yourself burn out. Recognize, get to know yourself, so you know when you are triggered or hyper aroused, understand how you can also regulate yourself, do plenty of things that enable you to be calm enough when you come to work. That, it's easier said than done. We all live very busy lives, but to really work at that and make space for that.
And there's a lot of fear, isn't there, around trauma informed as well, because if you go into a scenario and some of the conversations we've had, thinking of a dentist's environment. Now, I've had conversations with with dentists myself and hygienists, because this program is about sharing. For me, no matter how much I look after myself, going to the dentist is a traumatic experience. It's triggering, and I have unconscious responses that happen. You lay me down flat on a bed for too long, or a chair, and you're not actually working up, I actually have tears coming down. So to try and educate, and I have spoken with a couple of dentists over my time, and for those who want to listen, their next response is, but that's not my field of practice.
No.
It's nothing to do with that.
That's what I mean by trauma-informed communities. GPs, the dentists, the people on the end of the phone at the council. Yes. It's everyone's business to be trauma-informed.
Absolutely.
So when I was saying look after yourself, I meant the professionals, so that they can be attuned to what's going on for the person they're working with, and they can be the person that can help somebody to regulate,
absolutely,
being hyping themselves. But so I wanted to go to a little bit, if that's okay. I think that it does fit with your dentist example of then moving to trauma-informed practice in terms of organizations, because people can't do this on their own.
No.
It's not possible not to burn out if your organization's not supporting you. So a trauma-informed organization also properly understands what trauma is, properly understands the unconscious nature of it, understands that actually, to be a human being, most people will experience some form of trauma. It's not something that's just out there. Their staff will also carry their own trauma, as well as perhaps the severe trauma that we might be working with in our clients or patients. That there needs to be reflective time, there needs to be reflective practice for people to come together and learn and think together about, that was a difficult time when we had that particular session, and I just want to think about it with you all and think about what happened and what maybe I could have done differently, or just unpick it a bit. So reflecting on the support and the work that you do is really important, and learning from that and learning together, and not feeling you've got to have all the answers, being able to be with that. There's also an importance in recognizing power and where the power lays. So organizations that wield enormous amounts of power only in the senior leadership team and don't enable and listen throughout the team to others, and also to their service users and to the families of those service users, that's not being trauma-informed. Being trauma-informed is being able to share the power, to take responsibility. Actually, as leaders, you have responsibility to make good decisions to keep people safe, but not to use your power unwisely, but to work much more in partnership with people and hear what people have to say. You will learn so much from your staff and from the people that they're supporting and from their families. So good training, good supervision, good reflective practice, being humble enough to know there's always more to learn, and knowing it's a constant journey. It's something you're never just going to go, ha, we're there now.
And thank you, Noelle, because it really does make a difference, doesn't it, Chris? And it's something, everything you're saying really aligns with our own values, thoughts, and beliefs, really. Chris, is there anything you would like to add to that at the moment?
No, I've just been writing it all down so I can use it in the future. Constantly learning, evolving, you know, this is what this is all about.
We all are. That's the wonder of being human and alive, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, Chris, have you got a question for Noelle?
I have. So following on from that, being trauma informed and trauma attuned, as a manager of services, multiple over many years, how did you protect your staff from vicarious trauma and burnout? So you've talked about training, supervision and reflection, but is there an example that you could share with us at all?
Well, I don't know that I was always successful at it. I know I wasn't always successful at it, but I worked hard at trying to do that.
Yep.
All of the therapists that respond have weekly clinical supervision groups. And they're not too big, so there's a lot of time to spend on cases, and you know, everybody contributes and is thinking things through. And also some of the non-therapists that were doing work directly with people as well would have clinical supervision. We also once a month would have reflective practice groups. At one time when we were smaller, that would be the entire organisation, admin staff, finance, everybody in the room together with a skilled facilitator to be thinking about the dynamics that are coming from the work we're doing and how it gets played out. Now that we got too big for that to work at some point, and it got quite uncomfortable and difficult. And it took us probably a bit too long to work out it's not working. And then the pandemic came and it got even worse when we tried to do anything, this awful screen thing. And then we eventually brought in an organisation, a group of people that worked closely together who helped us to run smaller groups, but they worked closely together, so there was a connection between the groups so that it wasn't kind of too fragmented. And I think that worked better. That was just, you know, a year in when I left last year. But I think it's a work in progress. During the pandemic, I think was the hardest time. I think we were pretty harmonious organisation before the pandemic. We were a bit smaller. We saw each other every day. That was the key bit. You know, you'd know sports, and you'd have a quiet word, or you just know. And you know that it was a better time. And then we went into the pandemic, and I had COVID when we went into lockdown, so I was also absent, which I always regret, but what can you do? But my wonderful senior leadership team closed the organisation down and moved everything online within a week. All the therapy. I mean, if you'd asked us 2 weeks before that, will you be able to do the work online? Everyone would
be no way. No way.
No way. We do very special things, you know, we do it in person. But we did. We found a way, and 99% of the work moved online. And that some of that, little bits of that still carry on today, I understand. But that worked for quite a couple of years, but it took its toll on us enormously, because all that trauma was coming into their homes. They were managing whatever was going on in their own homes, whether it's their family or a shared house or whatever. And some of the staff, I think, got really triggered and really traumatized during that time. And you weren't near them, and you couldn't tell exactly what was going on for who, and things got out of control sometimes. And it was a really difficult time. And I don't think that was just for our organisation.
No.
And I think there's still some recovery to be made from that. I don't think we're talking enough about the trauma of the pandemic.
We're not.
Did that, that's done. No one's spending any time reflecting on what happened. And actually that leads me to where I am now. So I left Respond last year, and I realised when I left just how exhausted I was, not just from leading an organisation that does such extraordinary work for so long, but also going through the pandemic was really tough, and with no chance to breathe again after I came out of it. And I've now trained as a coach, which I've just loved retraining. That's been a lovely, lovely journey. And one of my many things that I want to carry on doing is to really give staff, particularly staff that are carrying leadership roles, an opportunity to have a space to think and to reflect and to work out the way forward, and to, you know, work out the challenge there is ahead. Is that a challenge that I want to work a way forward, or actually do I need to make a different choice? You know, just to have And I think as leaders of organizations, or as leaders of whatever we're leading, we can't lead well unless we give ourselves space to think. And it's often so much easier to do that if you've got somebody witnessing that thinking and just probing and guiding that thinking a little bit, because we often have the answers, or we understand the situation more than anyone, but we don't always give ourselves the time, and the protected time and the skilled kind of listening to make that happen.
Well, I've got a question now, Noelle, and it's a question that I actually enjoy asking because we don't often think of it like that. So if you go back to your 16-year-old self, what would she say listening to your story that you're telling today about all that you've achieved, in your work, in your education, in, all the challenges that you've overcome? What would she say to you?
I think she'd say you've got the wrong person, someone else, isn't it? Yeah.
What would you say to her then?
I'd say believe in yourself, because who knows, believe in yourself. Yeah.
Your story is absolutely amazing, and thank you. And it's so heartwarming to hear, because everybody else, all our listeners or our viewers, they know Chris and I's story, and we resonate with you so much. And it's so nice to hear everything. And going back to the community and care at that time, I remember when that came in myself, and I was actually working in an institution not too far from where Chris lives, and they were shutting it down. And like you say, yes, for some it was beneficial, but it wasn't very well thought through, and it was very challenging. So I think it's really listening about your loss and bereavement, courses and work that you've done is something that's very, very powerful. And I think it's something I certainly will be looking up to share with people as well. And I think that leads nicely. I know, Chris, you've got a question, and I know we haven't found out about Noelle's books, etc. yet, have we?
That's what I was going to do before we wrap up, is make sure we cover everything that you wanted to cover. So things like your future plans, your books, the research that you've been involved in, and anything else that you want to share with us.
No. Oh, I love the invitation. Thank you. Well, my original book, Loss and Learning Disability, is quite old now, I realise. I bought it out in 2003, so it is very old. But it's still a relevant book. But what I never did was, so I did my research, my PhD research in 2012 was when I qualified. And that was based on the loss and bereavement work that I'd done in the NHS and various papers that I published and bits of my book, and then brought that together with research that was current. So it was kind of a PhD through publication. And I've never really brought that together with the book. So I've gone back to my editor and my publisher and said, look, I'd really love to update the book. And they're really keen, which is lovely. So I'm going to be updating my book. I've been invited to be a keynote speaker at a European Congress. So Congress, did you ask me the difference between a Congress and a conference, or you might have used another word?
Symposia, I asked, what was that?
Put that in there. Anyway, Congress tends to be what we say. And it's a bigger conference, really, where the papers are published and you might get invited. Some speakers might get invited rather than have to pay and take their papers and deliver them. And it's usually international. So there's a European Congress on mental health and learning disability that happens every 2 years. And I've been invited to be a keynote speaker on bereavement and learning disability next year in Belgium. Now, I haven't really been focusing on bereavement for quite a long time. So I thought this is a good opportunity to get my book republished, because I'll steep myself back in that. There's also a bereavement needs assessment tool that I began to develop when I was more steeped in that work, before I was leading Respond, that needs a little bit of finishing off. It needs a little bit of trialing and smartening up. So I'm also hoping to do some work on that with my old university. So then I'll be able to take that work with me when I go next year. That's around that. I'm launching my own first website. I've never had a website before. And hopefully that will be launched towards the end of next week. I'm working with the British Institute of Learning Disabilities, which I'm loving, overseeing. So I work with them as an external consultant, and I'm overseeing their trauma-informed diploma. So it's a diploma in trauma-informed practice and a certificate in trauma-informed practice. And I've got a wonderful team of 3 tutors that are running the pilot at the moment. And then we do the bigger new cohort in September. And I think that's going to be a wonderful chance. And I think we'll keep working on that diploma. I think we've got a diploma that's great and good to go, but I think we can keep on making it better. I don't want to just stop there with the one we've got. And I'm really loving working with them, and also supporting them to really think about what it means to be a trauma-informed organisation, which I'm loving as well. And I'm also say to them what I've said today, which is it's a process and it never stops and it's difficult. But it's great that that's something that they're interested in wanting to do. And then, sorry, I have so many things.
No. Carry on.
And then I'm the chair of a new charity that's been going 4 years. That's very, very local. Came out of the big local program, some of you may know about. And through that, I'm just really enjoying seeing different ways that we can turn lives around. And that's not me doing it, but that's me supporting my wonderful team to do that. And that's also where I'm thinking these little thoughts about trauma-informed community, and can we be a start of being that engine in this area. And then there's my coaching. So I'm just launching out my new coaching career, which is also very exciting. I've got a few coachings happening, and I'm loving that. And yeah, that's me really. That's me now.
Not a lot really, Bev. She's only doing a little bit.
I'm in awe. I am in awe. And I've got loads of questions that I'd like to ask you personally another time anyway. But yeah, no, fantastic. And one of the things I'd like to say for anyone listening, we will be we're more than happy to feature the link to your new website when this podcast goes out. So anyone listening, if you want to find out more about Dr Noelle Blackman's work, look at the link below, and also we'll put some information about her books. So if you have a question for Dr Noelle Blackman after listening or watching, please feel free to either contact her through the website or email us, Chris and I, at breakingthecycle2stepforward@gmail.com. And just before we wrap up, and we have gone just over the hour, but we're not going to say anything about that. It's everybody gets a last thought of the episode, really. Podcast, yes. So, Noelle, you can give your thought of this afternoon, anything you'd like to share with anyone, or something reflective about yourself. What would you like to end with today?
I think for me, it's been quite a revelation to just think of my life journey, because I don't often stop and reflect, even though I say that's the most important thing. Probably not on my life. I haven't necessarily done that on my whole life for a long time. And just seeing how things led one to the other. But I think the key thing I'll be taking away, and I know this is the most important thing, is that everybody needs somebody to believe in them and to listen to them. And that's something that I hope I always try to do. But that's certainly what's always turned my life around in that pivotal time within the theatre. That really did.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, for yourself, what would be your last thought for today?
So, Dr Noelle Blackman, even that title made me think, before I knew you, that I couldn't reach out and speak to you because you're there and I'm here. Okay, but this is what many of us think. Yeah. So you could take me and you as an example of whoever. But we are all human, and we can just talk. We can find similarities, we can find commonalities, and we don't have to agree on everything. We just have to respect each other, learn from each other, grow. Something doesn't resonate with me or you, we can leave it. If something does, we can take it and we can grow with it. So that's my last thoughts and feelings. But I think you're wonderful, Noelle. And yeah, and it's just really lovely to hear your whole life story, because people even look at Bev and I and go, oh, I want to be doing what you're doing, but you've just got to do it. There's nothing special about you, Noelle. There's nothing special about me or Beverley. We just have seen where we can add value, and that's where we've placed ourselves, and that is what we continue to do. So that's my last thoughts, really, Bev, that anyone can do anything. They've just got to try and find the confidence or get the support and the help to move them forwards.
Or step into role. I know I still do that quite often.
Yes, yeah, and I'm very
authentically, but still step into role.
And that leads nicely because Step Forward is the name of my practice, and it is about one step at a time. And we see so much about how we can make changes or big changes, and it's not necessarily about the big changes. I very much believe in those very small things that get overlooked, because it's the small things that create the big changes. And trauma informed, being able to communicate with somebody, if they're a small person, get down to their level. Hello, listening, what's your journey, what's your story, so simple and yet so effective. So thank you. And this is the kind of thing that just warms my heart, and that's why we do our podcast. It's about anyone listening, learning, finding out information, and most importantly, I'm not alone.
Really, really lovely to talk to you both. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pleasure.
You're welcome. So we're going to finish the podcast now, so stay where you are. Bye everyone for now. See you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.